name is Debbie Donovan, and I'm on the board of the Brandywine Valley Driving Club. And okay, so I'm going to start out with just a quick overview for those of you who may not know anything about a driving derby. It's really a combination of cones and hazards, so not unlike two of the phases in a combined driving event, but it's a much more abbreviated version of those competitions. There's no dressage involved here. It's just cones and obstacles or hazards. The course itself is, and again, this is according to the American Driving Society rules. So when you see the first sentence there says the cones would be 6 to 16 pairs, that's part of the specifications in the ADS rules. So there's a combination of pairs of cones, just like you would do on a cones course, and marathon type of obstacles. There will be at least 2 of them and up to a maximum of 4. Now, the terminology here is a little different from combined driving. So if you're familiar with combined driving, you wouldn't know that a round is considered a timed run through the course. Now, just like a regular marathon course in a combined driving event, you are timed from start to finish. Although, unlike a combined driving event, there is no time limits, no minimum time, no maximum time. So you don't have to worry about whether you're going too fast or too slow and might get penalized for being outside of that range. Each of the competitors would perform the course at least one time, but possibly more. And usually, the way I've seen it, it's usually 2 rounds. That sometimes they're scheduled to go one right after the other, and other times they're scheduled so that there would be 1 or 2 competitors in between your 2 rounds. And I think that's usually the preference because people kind of want to get a little breather in between the 2 rounds and maybe have a better idea of what they might have done wrong the first time around. But the total, the scoring is such that it totals the 2 rounds or the multiple rounds. It's not the best of kind of thing. It's not like the best score for one round or the other. It's both together that they're the sum of. Now, penalties, I put a star by this because this is, again, different from combined driving. Penalties are all in seconds. So unlike a cones course where you might get 3 points for knocking over a ball or a cone, in this case, you get seconds. So everything is in seconds. There's no points to be translated to seconds or seconds to be translated to points as there is in cones, in a combined driving cones course or a marathon. Also, that's something that's a little different is when the course is ready for you to start, the official's going to just give you a signal. You can't start before that or you'll get a penalty, but unlike cones and marathon, it's not like you have to start like 45 seconds from the signal or anything. You're not given, a time penalty or any kind of penalty for starting a little slow, but typically you're waiting at the entrance gate, so there's not usually a problem. The gates are, again, similar to combined driving. For most of the levels, it's walk, trot, or canter, except as in combined driving, you would have no cantering in the training level. So this is just a little example, to give you the idea that you're going to go through some cones, then you're going to go through the obstacle 1, then you're going to go through some cones, and then you'll do obstacle 2, go through some more cones, and the start and the finish are always in the same place. So now we'll zero in on each different type of element that's in the course. So the marathon obstacles are basically the same as combined driving. You've got letters that are your gates, and you have to go through each gate in the right order, A, B, C, and you must go through in the correct direction. And again, if you're familiar with combined driving, it's always red on right. And again, the same thing, if you've been through a gate once in the right order and the right direction, then that gate becomes open, meaning you can go through that gate again when you're trying to get to another gate and you won't get penalized. So you might go through A, then B, then A again to get to C, and that's okay. Now, unlike combined driving, there's no official entrance or exit gates to the obstacle. So in combined driving, you're being timed for each obstacle. So you have to go through an entrance and an exit gate so that the timer can start and stop the clock. The only starting and stopping in this competition is in the beginning. So you have a start gate and a finish gate for the whole thing. And that's the only place that the timer is going to be standing. Now, if you make a course error, you go through A and then you go through C instead of B, you can correct it without being eliminated. So that's, again, the same as in combined driving. You just have to go back and kind of from the point where you went wrong. So if you went through A and then you went through C, you would want to go back and go through A and then B. The cones elements, again, are very similar to a regular cones course. They're gates as well in numbered orders. And you have to go through, again, in the correct order and the correct direction. However, you can only drive each pair of cones once, and of course, in the correct numeric order. And after you've driven the cones, unlike the hazard or the obstacles, it stays live. And if you go through that cone again a second time, even if you followed the numeric order for all the cones, you would be eliminated because that's a course penalty. And you cannot correct a course error when you're in cones. So different from the hazard or the obstacle, the marathon hazard, you cannot correct without being eliminated, which I know it's pretty harsh, but that's the way they've set the rules up. And that's true in a regular combined driving cones course as well. So here's an example of the cones course that we used in a Brandywine Derby that we had in the June of 2021, which I'm going to show you some pictures from. So this is typically what you'll get in terms of a course map before well, we would typically send it out before you come to the competition. So you'll have an idea of what the course is going to look like. And the key here is in the green box on the left. So that'll tell you the order that you're supposed to do the hazards and the cones in. So in this case, you're going to go through that start gate and you're going to do cones 1, 2, and 3. And then you're going to do hazard 1, then cones 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, do hazard 2, and then cones 10, 11, 12, and go through your finish. So that's very important. And it can be tricky because sometimes, maybe going from cone 3 to 4, not true in this case, but they might be close to the hazard and it might be kind of confusing when you're approaching the hazard. It might look like you have to go through 4 before you go through hazard 1, but, that would be obviously a course penalty. So, or an incorrect course. So you really need to be sure that you've got that down in your mind, that you plan your course correctly in terms of which cones you do before which hazards. Okay, so this is an example of that same course, but a blow up of one of the hazards so that you can see it. In this case, the blue circles. So in this case, the blue circles were barrels and the yellow square in the middle was a stack of hay bales or straw bales. And the letters were attached to that straw bale. So you can see that sometimes it's not easy it looks easy until you see the arrows, the directional arrows. So you can see that you would go through A. Now you've got to go around the barrel to get to B so that you can go in the opposite direction. So it's just something to be aware of when you're planning your course, that you make sure you have the directions correct. And in this case, we had 2 classes. We had a walk trot class and a trot canter class. Now you can have the same levels like, training level, prelim, intermediate, or you can just do it like that, where you have a walk trot class, which would be the equivalent of a training level, and a trot canter for the higher levels. So here's what the turnout requirements are. There is no requirement for a specific type of carriage, but typically you're going to see a marathon type carriage. And, the solid tires are usually used up in this area as opposed to down south where they have the sand footing is pretty common. But these are, you can see a couple of examples here where the people are competing with different kinds of carriages, different sized horses. In terms of safety, obviously helmets are required, meeting those standards, those national standards. Safety vests are required now by the ADS. So they were in the past optional, and I think that was true in 2021, perhaps. They are now required. A groom or a navigator riding on the back is required unless you're with a single VSE or a single, what they call a small pony, and there are measurement specifications for what a small pony is. As you can see, the one photo here, there is a mini who's competing, and there's obviously no room for a navigator.
Question for the mini competitors. I have a hyper bike and prefer to use that for all the advantages that easily maneuverable cart has. Will Brandywine allow that?
Yeah, as I said, there's no requirement for a specific type of carriage as long as it's safe. You know, you wouldn't want to have, you know, what I would call an antique, you know, pleasure drive carriage, because it,
right,
you know, the balance and the maneuverability would be very limited, and you know, more likely to turn over.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to show you some pictures from the driving derby that we had in June of 2021, so you can get an idea, looking at the people, what they're, you know, the attire and the kind of equipment that they have, and also what the hazards looked like. This was a hazard, obviously. This one was a fixed hazard. Here's the one that I described that we had in the diagram. And the size of the entire course is maybe about the size of a dressage arena. So it's not huge. It's not a lot of distance. I don't think your horse needs to be super fit for these, because you're not out on the course more than a couple of minutes. So it's not like a cross-country marathon where they need to be really fit. And that's just a little advertisement for our derbies this summer. Let me talk about the scoring a bit. So again, to emphasize, all the scoring is done in seconds. There's no points. The penalties are in seconds instead of being in points. Your final score is the sum of the scores for all the rounds. They're added together. It's not the best of. And the score for one round is going to be your total time to complete the course. So, you know, the timer starting when you go through the start gate and stopping when you go through the finish, and then all of the penalties that you might have accumulated. So it's a very simple score sheet, as you can see. Round one, the total time and the penalties. So you just add all those columns up and you get your total time. And obviously the lowest score is going to win. So now there's a lot of detail about the penalties. There are 3 types of penalties. There could be time that's added to your score. And I mentioned the example of a ball down. So that's a certain number of seconds that are added to your score. And then there's just time lost. So there might be things that you do. For example, if you had to get off and fix a piece of harness, which you have to do, if you've got a broken harness or something's wrong with your harness, you have to get down and fix it. Otherwise, that's a penalty. But you're not penalized for getting down to fix the harness. You're just going to lose time because it takes time for you to do that repair. But you're not going to get penalties. And then, of course, there's this big category of elimination, and there are quite a few things that can get you eliminated. So these are the penalties that you would normally think of in a cones course as being points, and instead they're seconds that are added to your total time. So it's the typical thing, a ball down. If you knock an obstacle over, knock a cones over and somebody has to run out and put it back together, they will stop the clock while it's being rebuilt, but you'll get an added penalty. So you would get 5 seconds for the knockdown, but then 5 seconds because the element had to be rebuilt. So it's a double whammy, so to speak. And then if you were to start, we talked about starting after the official gives you the signal. If you started before that, you get 10 seconds. Dismounting while the carriage is in motion. As I mentioned, you can dismount while the carriage, you can dismount and not get penalized, but if you dismount when the carriage is moving, that's going to get you a penalty. And we talked about correcting your course in a marathon obstacle. You can do that, but you're going to get 20 seconds added for making that correction. The groom is not supposed to take the reins or the whip or the brake, obviously, unless the driver dismounts from the carriage, and the groom has to, but there's going to be a 20-second penalty for that. And if a training level or a walk trot level person were to start cantering, they give them 3 seconds to bring the horse back to a trot or a walk. But if it goes over 3 seconds, then they're going to get a penalty of 20 seconds. So these are all the penalties where you're going to get time added as a penalty. And obviously the most common one is knocking over a ball. Now we typically set the cones fairly wide. You have the option, the organizer has the option of using cones settings based on the width of the carriage. But in many cases, just to reduce the number of volunteers needed to reset cones and things like that, they make it easier. So they'll set it to like 175. It's pretty common as a one size fits all. It usually accommodates 2-wheeled vehicles as well as the narrower marathon vehicles. So that's not usually a big issue. You don't usually have a lot of knockdowns since the cones are usually set fairly wide. So this was the category where you're just going to lose time. The first or second time that your horse shows a disobedience. Now, you may not be familiar with that term, but there are examples in the rules of what that means. Example would be if you come up to a pair of cones and your horse shies at it, jumps sideways maybe, or if the horse stops in front of it, that's also a disobedience. Or maybe you have to rein back because the horse was coming too close to the cone and you didn't want to hit it. I did that once and I didn't realize that reining back is more points against you than knocking over a cone. So I was one time driving into cones. I realized my wheel was going to hit that cone. I stopped before I hit the cone and I backed up, and then I made it through clean, but I got 5 points instead of 3 points for that disobedience. So that's something, you need to know your penalties well so that you can figure out quickly, is it better for me to just run over the cone, or should I try to correct it, by reining back or stopping the horse? You can intentionally dismount, as I mentioned, that's fine. And you can do it 1 or 2 times and you're just going to lose time. There's no penalty unless you dismount while the carriage is moving, of course. On the 3rd time, that's going to be penalized. So, that you'll see this theme of first and second one is okay. You're just going to lose time. So these first 2 that you're looking at, that's kind of the idea. That's the 3rd time that you're going to get struck out. Now, the 3rd one is, it's kind of confusing, but the idea here is that if the groom or the driver does get off of the carriage, you stop and they get off, it's okay as long as they get back on before you go through another gate, the next cone. So you don't want to start moving again without your groom or your driver on the carriage, because that would be penalized. Okay, long list of eliminations. So the first one's obvious. If you don't go through the start or finish gate, they can't start or stop the timer on you. So that's going to get you out. The course errors in cones. You cannot make a course error in cones. That's definitely going to get you out. If you made a course error in the marathon obstacle and you didn't correct it, that's another one. And then here comes that third disobedience would get you an E. If you go through the finish line without your groom, that's definitely a problem. Or if you're again, this is the third time either the groom or the driver gets off the carriage, that would be an elimination. And as I mentioned before, if you don't get down and fix your broken harness, that's going to get you eliminated. And as I explained in this next bullet, so if the driver or the groom gets down off the carriage, but then they don't get back on until after you've gone through the next numbered gate or the finish line, that's obviously not going to be good. And as I had mentioned before, if a driver or the groom is going to get back on, the carriage must be at a halt. So when they're getting off and when they're getting back on, the carriage must be at a standstill. And the next one is pretty obvious too. If the driver falls off the carriage, now they don't say anything about the groom falling off the carriage, unintentional dismount for the groom. So I don't know, that may be okay. Not okay for the groom, obviously. And turning over the carriage is going to get you out. And of course, for the welfare of the horse, excessively using the whip is going to get you eliminated. And that's going to be a judgment call by the judge for sure. Okay, so to finish this up, I'm going to show a nice video. Now this is a video of an advanced level horse, so don't think this is the way everybody looks through a driving derby, but I thought it was interesting and fun to watch. You can see there that the cones were set pretty far apart, so that's not usually a problem. And then some more advertisement for our upcoming competitions. So that's it. I mean, there's not a lot to it, obviously, but it's good to know the the penalty situations to try and keep yourself out of them. Any other questions? Yes. Unmute yourself. Yep.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi.
Yeah, so typically, how do they divide the classes? How do they form classes? How does it work?
Well, you can do it anyway. I mean, you could do training level, prelim, that sort of thing. But you know, as we showed in the Brandywine one that we had a couple years ago, it seemed to make more sense just to classify it as walk trot and walk trot canter, you know. So basically the person that's entering it is going to judge whether they feel they're able to safely navigate the course at a canter. Usually in the registration form, we'll ask for the experience level of the horse. So if somebody was to say, you know, oh, I've done some training level things, and then they sign up for walk trot canter, we might want to talk to them about that, whether they really feel that they're ready for it. But again, these courses are not usually set up real aggressively. So yeah, it's not, you know, a case where you've got hazards that are built on a hill or something like that, where somebody could easily turn over. They're usually on a nice flat surface, unlike some of the combined driving hazards. Typically not like in a woods with natural obstacles that you could, you know, really do some damage. So yeah, I mean, we're planning, the ones we're planning to have will be with some portable hazards. We're not going to use natural hazards with immovable objects. So yeah, I don't think that they're going to be too dangerous, but
thank you very much.
Is everybody thinking about maybe trying a driving derby? What kind of interest do you have? Just unmute yourself if you want to talk.
I'd like to give kind of a sales pitch for the derbies, because I did the Brandywine Valleys Derby that summer. What was that? Summer 21.
21.
Yeah. And it was hot as heck. But other than that, it was a great experience. And then this summer I went down to Harlequin and did their derby. And that was lots of fun as well. The thing I like about the derbies is because I don't do CDEs because I'm training level. I've only been driving 5 years. So I'm relatively inexperienced, but the derbies offer a way to introduce you to a hazard. The 2 courses that I've done, I didn't find the hazards particularly difficult, having been kind of reared on Fair Hills hazards, which are very hard and very tricky, I think. These others flowed nicely because I complimented Harlequins and they were like, well, you know, we had some of the minimum openings, which was 2.5 meters, and then some of the other openings were 3 meters. I was like, well, it was really nice because I could just flow through these things. And then you go in, and once you've done the hazard, you go out and you do like 4 cones, say, and they're not overly hard. And anyway, they've both that I've done have been short in duration, which is good because I have a draft pony, and if you're doing it in the summer, she doesn't breathe that well. So, and they were very inviting and they flowed smoothly, if I haven't said that before. And then I really just enjoyed it because, especially with Brandywine's, I have to say, there's a guy on here listening tonight, Mike Ponce, took it in his hands unofficially to lead us into some partying. And so while they worked on the numbers, people brought out hors d'oeuvres, cocktails, lunch, whatever they had. And it was a great chance to sit around and meet all kinds of people and share stories. And it was a wonderful experience. It really was. It was a lot of fun. I really recommend a derby because I mean, both derbies, there's been maybe like 13 to 15 people tops. So it's not like overwhelming, like, oh, number 30, you're in, you know, hurry up and get it done. It's a very much, it's a relaxed atmosphere. So I highly recommend doing it. That's my take.
Thanks, Anne. I appreciate that personal experience. And you know, that is the point you made about it being short and in duration, because if it is hot, and if your horse isn't super fit, it's nice because it's just a couple of minutes that they're you know, that they're actually on deck doing the run. And you know, I think it's a good idea to have them separated, your 2 rounds usually, so that you get a little breather for you and your horse in between. So yeah, it's not like doing a marathon that's 20, 25, 30 minutes long, and that's only one phase. You know, this is all over and done with, and you can party and enjoy the rest of the day. And typically, especially for people traveling maybe a distance, we're going to probably try to not start like at 8 o'clock in the morning. You know, it would be something maybe like 10 o'clock. So you have a chance to walk the course before. And since the course is not that long, you know, if you're too far to come the day before to walk it, it gives you a chance to walk it in the morning. So I think those are all pluses in addition to all the things that Anne said. Definitely a good beginner show for anybody interested in combined driving.
Debbie, I have a question. So if I've done my first round, how do you organize when I would come back? Is it if there are 5 people in my group and I'm number 1, all 5 go through and then I start again? How does the second go round typically look?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it done 2 ways. One way was back to back, and that didn't seem to be, you know, I heard people say that they would like to have had a breather in between. But the ones that I've attended, they usually put 1 or 2 people, they stagger it. So you would have a schedule, and they would stagger by putting 1 or 2 people in between your 2 runs. So it would be a published schedule, and you would have your times.
Okay, thank you.
Oh yeah, I see somebody in the chat here. They're mentioning that the September date is going to be during MARD. So yes, MARD attendees could participate just as anybody else does. It would be over at the Gallagher Road area where we typically have Teddy Bear's Picnic, if you're familiar with that. So it's a nice area. It's a nice wide open area with plenty of parking and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, I don't see any problem there.
Are we going to use grass or the stone dust?
You know, you saw the picture or the video that was done in a stone dust. It's sometimes for upper level drivers, you could see there was a lot of the carriage was sliding a bit, that sort of thing. You typically don't find that if you're not cantering, and if somebody's you know, at a level where they normally canter, then I don't think it's a big deal to use a stone dust ring. That seems to be a nice way to do it. It's got, you know, the one at Fairhill has the fencing around it, so it's a nice contained area. But it could be done on grass. The one we did at Chapter 1 Farms was done on grass. As long as it's a nice level area, I think it could be either.
There's also a benefit to being able to walk the course and learn about the hazards as well. Definitely helpful.
Yeah, that's definitely a learning experience for sure. And the nice thing about the 2 rounds is, you know, when you were walking the hazards, you might have decided, well, I could go this way or that way. And sometimes it's kind of neat because you can try the first round, you could try it the first way you were thinking of, and then you could do the second way the second time, and then you'd see the 2 times in your score sheet. You'd see the 2 times and which way was better, you know. So you could, you know, if you were brave, you could try 2 alternative routes through your hazards for the 2 rounds.
About the role of the navigator in the Derby?
Yeah, just like in a combined driving event. Well, the one thing the navigator does not have to do in the Derby is have that wear their watch and track the time. And that's kind of nice too. As Ann said, this is a good beginning introduction to combined driving because there's some things that you don't have to do. And that one of them is keeping time, which is complicated. You know, trying to make sure you don't come in too fast or too slow. So that's one thing the navigator does not have to do. But the thing that they do have to do is make sure that the driver is following the correct route. That, you know, the groom can tell you if, oh, you're heading for the wrong cone. No, you know, you missed cone 3. You got to go over there, not the way you're headed. Same thing in the hazards. You know, you can make sure that your drivers knows the hazard. You know, it's always good, I think, sometimes to right before you go into the hazard say, okay, don't forget you're going to go around back for for gate A, so that they kind of know that they're heading in the right direction. The challenging thing I find with the derbies is that you're trying to keep it straight in your mind, your cones course straight in your mind, and then all of a sudden you're in a hazard and you got to keep that straight in your mind. I did one at Susie Stafford's and she had a very complex cones course to go with the hazards, and it was a lot of cones and pretty twisty turny. So it was to get your mind to get, you know, okay, I got through those cones. Now I'm like going into the hazard and I've got to remember the hazard. Whereas on a marathon course and a combined driving event, you're just driving, you know, along pretty much a straight line from hazard to hazard. So you get plenty of time in between the hazards to say, okay, the next hazard, let me remember what that is. I go back to here for the A and then I have to go around to B. You can't do that in a derby because you're going from cones right into the hazards so quickly. So it is challenging in terms of, you know, mentally keeping track of your course route there. But that's what your navigator is for, to help you out with that. As well as obviously, you could see in that video, the navigator was very important to try and keep the carriage from fishtailing and from swerving too much. That driver could have actually used a heavier, a more weighty person on the back to hold that carriage down. But yeah, so those are in a derby, again, the navigator doesn't have as much to do, but what they do is pretty important.
So
I mean,
it sounds like a ton of fun. I gotta
oh,
be
it
honest.
is. Yeah.
I come from a background of doing speed classes with jumpers,
Oh, wow.
and I did that at national level in the UK a long time ago. And what we used to find was when you're focusing on speed, very often the animals stop wanting to listen as much. And I'm wondering if there's a possibility somewhere in this at some point that there might be a division that's an optimum time rather than a fastest time. Introducing, you know, new people or green horses,
Yeah.
that we can keep it as safe as possible.
Well, and that's the reason for a walk trot or a training level, is to
Yeah.
make sure those people that aren't, you know, don't have a lot of experience, that they stay in that class. So at a trot, it's, you know, it's a little harder unless you have a horse that's really fast trot.
Yeah.
It's a little harder for things to get out of control. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
can walk, you know, I've
Yes,
seen
yeah.
people, you know, newbies, I've seen them walk the hazards, and that's perfectly fine. You
Right.
know, if your horse
It's just a
doesn't
mileage.
understand what a hazard is, and you're, you know, turning him in all directions through things that he can't see because he's got those blinders on, he's got to trust you. So
Yep.
in situations like that, it's probably better to walk. You know,
Mhm.
it can be overwhelming even to trot. So
Right.
yeah, it's perfectly fine to walk.
So just going back to your vehicles, no particular kind of vehicles required. And there were definitely photographs of carts, and it's okay to do this with 2-wheel carts rather than carriages too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and as Ann said, the hazards are not usually set up to be super narrow slots that you have to get through. You know, they're pretty wide, the route through the hazard, so that even a 2-wheel cart can do it. You know, it's not going to be a real detriment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining, and I hope to see you at our derbies. It'd be fun to see this many people at our derby.